We have to bring back religion in America, bring it back stronger than ever before as our country grows stronger.
In the grand silence of an evening where the world seemed caught between tension and curiosity, Ibrahim Traoré found himself in a room that very few had ever occupied with such candor. Donald Trump sat across from him, his posture at once proud and guarded, his eyes searching for meaning in the younger man's presence. What began as a meeting of two powerful figures from vastly different worlds soon transformed into a dialogue that neither could have anticipated. Trump had always been accustomed to controlling the narrative, commanding attention with bold words and unyielding confidence. But this time, something in the air felt different. Traoré's presence carried a weight that was neither loud nor brash, but firm, steady, like the earth itself. He spoke slowly at first, as though measuring the moment, and then, with a quiet conviction, he began to speak about Christianity, not in the way theologians argue or preachers sermonize, but in a way that seemed to pierce directly into the hidden chambers of the heart. "You have known Christianity through power," Traoré said softly, his eyes fixed on Trump. "You have seen it draped in flags, echoed in speeches, carried like a weapon in politics. But tell me, has it ever been revealed to you as life, as sacrifice, as the fire that consumes pride and builds humility?" Trump raised an eyebrow. He was not unused to hearing critiques, but the tone of Traoré's words disarmed him. They weren't accusations, they weren't praises. They were something deeper, as though he were being invited into a mirror he had never dared to look into. Christianity, Traoré continued, is not about monuments or megachurches, not about leaders who shout louder than others. It is about the man who carried the cross when he could have chosen the throne. It is about the one who washed the feet of his disciples when he could have demanded them to kneel. The room seemed to grow stiller. Trump leaned forward, perhaps out of instinct to respond, but no words came. There was a strange vulnerability in the air, a tension that seemed to press down not with force, but with truth. "You see," Traoré said, "the greatest danger to Christianity has never been its enemies. The greatest danger has always been those who wear its name, but forget its essence. Kingdoms rise and fall, empires declare themselves chosen, leaders claim divine favor. But the Christ who walked the earth was never seeking empires. He was seeking hearts." For a moment, Trump's face softened. It was as though he had been struck by something unexpected, something that did not accuse but unwrapped. Traoré leaned back slightly, his hands resting calmly on his knees. "I have seen men," he went on, "who quote the Bible with their lips but betray it with their actions. I have seen leaders pray loudly in public, then oppress the weak in private. And I have seen others who never set foot in a church, but live in such love, such mercy, that they reveal Christ more than any sermon ever could. Do you see the paradox? Christianity has been reduced in the eyes of the world to power, to control, to influence. Yet its core is the opposite: surrender, humility, love." Trump shifted in his seat. He was not accustomed to listening for this long without interruption, but something in Traoré's voice carried the force of inevitability. "Christianity," Traoré said with more intensity now, "was never meant to be a tool for political gain. It was meant to liberate the oppressed, to heal the broken, to transform the proud into servants. Yet for centuries, men have wielded it like a sword of domination instead of a basin of water to wash feet. The result? The world looks at Christians and sees hypocrisy instead of light." Trump finally spoke, his tone uncharacteristically subdued. "But you must admit, religion has always been tied to power. Leaders need it. People need it. Nations rally around it. Isn't that the way the world works?" Traoré's eyes did not waver. "That is the way of the world. But it is not the way of Christ. And that is the difference. If we judge Christianity by the way nations use it, then we will always be deceived. But if we see it as Christ lived it, then everything changes." The words lingered. They were not arguments designed to win, nor rhetoric crafted for applause. They were revelations meant to unsettle, to stir, to awaken something buried. Trump exhaled slowly, as if realizing he had stepped into waters far deeper than expected. You want to know why Christianity shakes men to their core? Traoré continued, his voice like a low drumbeat. Because it calls the strong to become weak. It calls the rich to give away. It calls the powerful to bow. It says to forgive when revenge feels right, to love when hate feels natural, to carry the burden of others when you already carry your own. That is not convenient for kings or presidents. That is why so many twist it into something easier, something that flatters instead of transforms. Trump stared at him. For perhaps the first time in a long time, he was silent. Not because he had nothing to say, but because he knew words would not be enough. I do not tell you this to accuse, Traoré said, his tone softening. I tell you this because the world is watching men like you. And when the world sees leaders speak of Christianity, but live contrary to it, faith itself becomes corrupted in their eyes. But when even one leader chooses humility, chooses mercy, chooses truth, then Christianity becomes alive again. He paused, as though measuring Trump's reaction. Do you know what true strength is? Traoré asked. It is not in building towers that touch the sky. It is not in commanding crowds with speeches. True strength is in kneeling when you could stand tall, in forgiving when you could retaliate, in serving when you could be served. That is what the Christ showed. And that is what Christianity really means. Trump's fingers tapped the armrest of his chair, slowly, rhythmically. His eyes had a distant look, as though something was unfolding within him that no one else could see. Traoré leaned closer now, his voice nearly a whisper. You have lived surrounded by power, by applause, by influence. But Christianity asks you, what will remain when the crowds are gone? What will stand when empires fall? What will be said of you when your name is nothing but a memory? The kingdoms of men rise and crumble, but the kingdom of God is built on love, and love never crumbles. For the first time, Trump did not counter. He did not frame a response, did not defend, did not argue. He simply sat there, absorbing the words as if they had pierced something he rarely allowed to be touched. And Traoré kept speaking, weaving a vision of Christianity, not as it had been misused, but as it truly was. He spoke of compassion as revolution, of humility as victory, of sacrifice as the highest form of power. He described Christianity not as a religion to be claimed, but as a life to be lived. Every word seemed to peel away layers of pride, leaving only the raw essence of what it meant to follow Christ. The night grew long, but neither seemed to notice. What had begun as a meeting of politics turned into a communion of souls. Trump, for perhaps the first time in years, listened without seeking advantage. And Traoré, for perhaps the 1000th time, spoke not as a leader but as a witness to something greater than himself. At last, when silence returned, Traoré's final words hung in the air like a bell tolling in the night. When the conversation between Ibrahim Traoré and Donald Trump ended that night, the air seemed to linger heavy with the echoes of words that could not be forgotten. Yet what happened after was even more profound, for the dialogue did not remain trapped in the walls of that room. It spread like ripples, reshaping how one could imagine the meaning of Christianity when stripped of politics, pride, and the pursuit of power. Trump left the room with a silence rare for a man who thrived on words, applause, and attention. He walked as though burdened not by defeat, but by reflection, a quiet weight that pressed deeper than arguments or debates. For years, Christianity had been to him a symbol of tradition, culture, and strength, a banner waved in rallies, a word invoked in speeches, a bridge to connect with millions who believed. But in Traoré's words, Christianity had been torn away from its political garments and placed before him naked, vulnerable, radiant, terrifying in its demand for humility and love. Traoré, meanwhile, did not consider himself victorious. He had not come to win an argument or prove a point. He had spoken as one who carried fire, as one who knew that truth does not demand applause, it demands transformation. His words were seeds, and whether they grew or not was no longer in his control. The next morning, the world continued as if nothing had changed. News networks debated policies, commentators dissected speeches, and politicians maneuvered for advantage. Yet in a private corner of thought, something lingered with Trump. He replayed Traoré's words, the Christ who chose the cross instead of the throne, the leader who washed feet instead of demanding loyalty, the strength found in surrender. Trump had always admired strength, the visible kind, the kind that commanded crowds and crushed opponents. But now he was haunted by a different picture of strength, one he could not easily dismiss. Could it be that true greatness was not in dominating, but in serving? Could it be that the legacy of a man was not the towers he built, but the lives he lifted? For days he wrestled, though no one around him knew. Pride urged him to dismiss the conversation, to call it idealistic, to treat it as the musings of a revolutionary from a far-off land. But the heart is not so easily silenced, and the memory of Traoré's steady voice refused to vanish. Traoré himself returned to his duties, yet he too carried the weight of that night. He knew he had touched something fragile, something hidden deep within a man accustomed to wearing armor of self-assurance. He knew that truth, once spoken, has a way of breaking through the hardest walls. Whether it happened immediately or decades later was not the concern of the one who planted it. And so, the story of that conversation became like an invisible thread tying two men together across worlds. For Trump, the thread tugged at him during moments of triumph and moments of isolation. In the roar of crowds, he wondered if applause was hollow. In the quiet of the night, he wondered if perhaps humility had more power than he had ever realized. For Traoré, the thread reminded him that even the mightiest of men are but fragile vessels when confronted with truth. Those who observed Trump began to notice subtle shifts, not proclamations, not dramatic changes, but flickers of thoughtfulness where once there had only been assertion. He spoke more carefully at times, pausing longer before responding, as though measuring not just the political cost but something deeper. Some dismissed it as age, some as strategy, but those who looked closely saw the shadow of a seed beginning to stir. Traoré, on his part, continued to speak not only to leaders but to ordinary people, always returning to the same theme, that Christianity is not spectacle, not performance, not an instrument of politics. It is a way of life, a call to transform pride into service, power into sacrifice, hate into love. People listened because his words did not come as slogans, but as conviction carved by fire. In time, whispers spread of the conversation between the two men. Though no transcript existed, fragments of what was said leaked into the world. Enough to intrigue, enough to unsettle. Some mocked, some dismissed, but many wondered. What could have been said that left even a man like Trump momentarily silent? The descriptions painted a picture of a Christianity most had forgotten, a Christianity not draped in gold or wielded as a political weapon, but lived in the small, hidden acts of mercy. Stories of Christ washing the feet of his disciples began to resurface in conversations. People who had grown numb to sermons suddenly found themselves asking whether the essence of their faith had been lost in noise and ambition. And so, the dialogue of that one night began to ripple outward, reshaping imagination. Trump himself never openly confessed what the words had done to him, but every so often in his pauses, in his softened tones, one could glimpse the shadow of that encounter. Traoré, too, never boasted of it, never claimed it as an achievement, for he knew that truth does not belong to the speaker, but to the one who is truth. Years later, when both men had moved on to new seasons of their lives, the story remained like a legend, half told, half remembered, yet always piercing. People retold it not because they cared about politics, but because they longed to recover the Christianity that had been spoken of that night, a faith of humility, of mercy, of love so fierce it unsettles the proud and comforts the broken. In the end, that was the true power of the conversation. It was not about Trump or Traoré, not about leaders or nations, not about politics or strategy. It was about Christianity itself, unmasked, unchained, revealed in its raw and demanding beauty. And once revealed, it could not be forgotten. The world may continue to twist religion for its purposes, Empires may continue to stamp divine approval on their ambitions, but somewhere in the memory of humanity lingers the reminder of a different vision, the Christ who chose the cross instead of the throne, and the Christianity that dares to follow him there. And that is why what Ibrahim Traoré told Donald Trump will never fade. It was not just words. It was an unveiling. It was the sound of truth knocking at the door of pride, calling it to surrender, calling it to love. That call still echoes. And for anyone who dares to listen, it changes everything.